Um, welcome everybody. I said that a minute ago. Today I'm very happy to have Jenny Sampson and Robert Schultz with us. Jenny's going to be talking about Skater Girls and a little bit about our previous book, Skater. And Robert is going to be discussing his work he did with Van Damme, Structures of War, memoranda, photography, Walt Whitman, and memorials. As those of you that have been here before know, we will record this today. If you have a problem getting recorded, just don't talk. We do ask that you let our speakers do their thing for, as you know, 10, 15 minutes and not interrupt. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers. We also ask that you turn off your mics while the speakers are speaking so that we don't get interrupted with pet noise, construction noise, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton over to Jenny and let her get going.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks so much for having me. And thanks everyone for attending this morning or today. I'm going to be talking about primarily Skater Girls right here at this. I actually made 2 books with Daylight Books. Skaters came out in 2017 and Skater Girls just came out last month. Yeah, so I'll just talk briefly about the genesis of the series, and then I'll show you some pictures about the process. I began photographing, well, all of these portraits are, I make tintypes, so wet plate collodion process. I have a portable darkroom that I drive around with, and I go to skate parks. And the reason why I started going to skate parks was I was very drawn to that community, and originally I was drawn to them because before I even knew what wet plate collodion was, I was photographing medium format, black and white, very much attracted to gesture and posture. So I kind of was making what I call abstract portraits, not often straight faced, but more truncated faces, parts of bodies, and just very much kind of found posture, you know, and how we hold ourselves when we're not conscious of that. And I thought, I saw this skate park. I was living in Seattle at the time. I would ride by the skate park on my bike on my way to work, and it just seemed like a perfect place to go and photograph people where they would ignore me and I could just kind of focus on how they naturally are, and I could hone in on that. But I was intimidated. I wasn't a skater. My boyfriend wasn't a skater. I didn't know how to enter that world. And I just kind of put it in the back of my head, like at some point in my life, I'm going to do this. Jump ahead, that was in 1994. So jump ahead to 2008. I learned how to make tintypes at Rayco Photo Center in San Francisco. And I actually started making very formal portraits at that time because the process requires a lot of light, slow exposures. You have to definitely have your subjects remain still. And I quickly realized that I needed to be able to make tintypes out in the field. At the time, I was tethered to a darkroom or a home where I could set up some kind of makeshift darkroom in a basement or whatever, but I couldn't just go out and about and shoot. So I built a portable darkroom, and this was in Berkeley in 2010. I finished my darkroom, and it just so happened that I had driven by a skate park near my house in Berkeley to avoid traffic. And I thought, oh, I didn't know that skate park was there. I finished my portable darkroom and I thought, I'm just going to go to that skate park and see what happens. And I kind of unconsciously realized that I like setting up my camera, setting up the chemistry, setting up my portable darkroom was a great distraction. And it allowed me to just like go there, focus on my own stuff, and then just walk up to someone and talk to them, which was, I mean, it was kind of scary, but I definitely was able to protect myself with all my equipment. And I made about 8 portraits that day, and I immediately saw something there that I was not expecting. I mean, first of all, people were super agreeable. I mean, I had to pull them away from the skate park to stand for me and hang out with me for 10 or 15 minutes. That's kind of a big investment in a way if you're just at a skate park going to skate. And also I was able to, if you're familiar with wet plate collodion, you make the exposure and you develop it immediately afterwards. And so the subject can actually watch their portrait emerge out of the fixer. And it's a really magical process. And it's even more exciting if it's your own face. And so it was like this, I was able to share this whole process with them, which made it easier too. But I immediately knew that I was onto something because there was this mix of this contemporary subculture and this really, really old photographic process. And so I just continued to photograph. And I would drive around to skate parks. And that's what this book is from. I was photographing for this book from 2010 until 2017 when it came out. And towards the end of making this book, the deadlines, I met a group of girls at a skate park. I had seen girls and women around here and there, but there weren't very many. And it wasn't necessarily an easy thing to even approach someone at a skate park, because sometimes they're there for 10 minutes. Sometimes they're way at the other side of the skate park. I can't get there. I mean, there were times that I would spend 6 hours at a skate park and maybe get one tintype. So it was not, there were no promises. But I met a group of girls and they told me about an organization called Skate Like a Girl that focused on providing safe spaces and events for girls and women. And so I went to an event and it was just all girls. I hadn't seen anything like it. And I decided at that time, okay, when I'm done with my skater deadlines, I'm going to focus just on the girls. And so that's Skater Girls. And I think what I'll do is share my screen so I can show you. Let's go like this. Oops, I'm going to take off this and this. Oh no, I'll do the images first. Sorry, guys. As I mentioned, you know, there were not always a lot of girls and women at skate parks. So in order to really be able to focus on this community, I went to events that were girl centric. So there were competitions, there were activities and various things. And I would go and I would set up my darkroom. By this time I was shooting 8x10. For the first book, I was shooting 4x5. So I actually had a really small darkroom, but for the 8x10, I basically had to build a big tent because I needed to be able to accommodate bigger plates, more chemistry. I just needed much more space. And so I would just arrange with the organizers of these events to have a space where I could make the work. And what ended up happening is, I mean, it was really incredible. I ended up realizing I needed sign-up sheets. I needed an assistant. It just became kind of a big thing, a big shebang. And I mean, a busy day. I think my record was maybe 26 tintypes in a day. And that was like with an assistant who was able to do everything except making the pictures. So I had one assistant who was able to handle all the folks, handle the sign-up sheet, handle moving all my plates through the water washes, touching them up before pulling them out of the final washes, putting them in the drying racks, and then waiting for them to dry, and then putting them in sleeves. Not everyone I necessarily trust to do that. These are really delicate. And so if I have someone who can literally do whatever it is I am doing, that's how many tintypes I can make. And it's a pretty intense, fast moving, even though the process is slow, experience, and exhausting. But also exhilarating, because all these folks, like they're, you know, that skateboarding has been historically a very male dominated landscape, and there have always been girls and women there, but they haven't always had the voice. Now a lot more people, a lot more kinds of people have a voice. And seeing everyone come together, like extremely supportive community, and brave and incredible skaters. I mean, skateboarders, I don't know if any of you know any, but man, they take a beating and they keep going back. I have learned a lot about failing and trying again and failing and trying again and failing and trying again and then succeeding. These folks are tough physically and mentally and just incredibly supportive. Also a lot of situations where mothers and daughters and fathers and daughters and sons are out there skating, which is an, you know, beautiful thing to see, you know, sharing this experience of extreme fun, like very, very core basic fun, athleticism and strength, and also failure and trying again and succeeding. Like showing that you can fail and keep going with your child, I think is just an incredible message. This one is actually pretty unique because she's smiling. This is Nicole. Exposures are very long. I generally ask people not to smile. They can be happy, but if you smile, it's usually like a fleeting moment, as probably many of you know. It's in your eyes. It's not just a physical thing. It's like very, very deep within. And so in order to get a very honest portrait, I generally ask them not to smile. But, you know, Nicole actually, as soon as I said, okay, I'm opening the exposure, she just started smiling. She actually had a completely deadpan expression beforehand. I was absolutely shocked when that came out. Father and young daughters, teaching them how to skate. And even non-traditional skaters. This is Tracy, and she skates in skate parks and competes, and incredible human, and held this pose, by the way, for about 15 or 20 seconds. So immensely impressive. All right, so those are some pictures from the book. And now I'm gonna talk a little bit about the making of the book. Let me eliminate those. You can still see everything, right? Okay. So what I did is I had a couple hundred photographs or tintypes, and I made these big sheets that I then had printed at Costco, super cheap. And then I cut them up in order to look at a physical thing. Here's a picture of one of them on my kitchen love seat. spread them out on my dining room table for a very long time and just worked with them, tried to figure things out. When this was, so in terms of the timeline, the quarantine, the pandemic and the quarantine were in full effect when I was in the editing mode. I got some help, but it was really tough because people were scrambling. It was a really tough time. I didn't know. Sometimes I didn't even know what was going to be happening from week to week, but I just kept working on it. And yeah, that's kind of what I did. It was really hard. It was super painful. So many pictures did not make it, and I was not happy about it, but what are you going to do? I worked with daylight, and this is, I don't show anybody this stuff, so you guys are lucky. This is a PDF from my designer, working through like final edits and stuff and how the book is going to look. I asked 2 women to participate, to collaborate with me on this book. One was Cindy Whitehead. She is a pro skater from the 70s, super amazing human, very supportive of girl skaters. She started an organization called Girl Is Not a 4-Letter Word. And she's just incredibly positive, proactive, supportive of the community. So she wrote an essay for me, and then also Becky Beale, who is a professor at Cal State East Bay, professor of kinesiology and sociology, and I actually met her through a skater I photographed in 2017 who was taking classes from Becky, and she introduced us. And I had an idea that I was going to be doing this book, so a couple years in advance, I just shot Becky an email and asked if she would be interested and available in participating with me. And she wrote a really great essay about more the sociological gender dynamic aspects of skateboarding. This is a full spread, 2-page spread. And then it goes into the book. I'm going to go pretty quick here. Different layouts, similar layout, basically very similar layout to my skater book. Some singles, some full bleeds, and then some grids. And I think I added a couple more grid. I think we added one more grid page to Skater Girls because there were too many pictures and I couldn't decide. Anyway, I think I'll stop there. Let me stop sharing. How is that?
That was great.
Okay.
I've seen your work someplace before, online interview or something, maybe in Black and White magazine or Shots magazine or something like that.
Let's see. I actually have never been in Black and White. Shots, I've been in Shots for both
Okay.
Tintype and Silver Gelatin. I don't think they've interviewed me.
Okay.
But I actually did do an interview with PDN last year, right before they closed up shop, about what I learned, things I learned making a book.
Were you in Eye of Photography by any chance?
Yes. Yeah.
That's where I saw it then.
Skater Girls, like, man, this was an incredible year for Skater Girls to come out. The reason why it came out when it did was because skateboarding was going to be in the Olympics for the first time ever this past summer. And so I wanted my book to come out close to that. Of course, the Olympics are postponed for another year, and who knows what happens after that. But that that was potentially very helpful for it. But also, you know, it's the 100th anniversary of suffragette and all that. Girl power, girl, everything is just so big right now. Well deserved. And so this like kind of came out at a perfect time, and we're all stuck at home. And so we're all online, and I mean, it got a lot of great attention. I mean, there was the BBC picked it up, Eye of Photography, the New Current, Leica International. They gave it Book of the Month for September, which, you know, blew me away. Just an enough press that my head was spinning. I did not know what to do. And then Michael wrote me.
In one of the current issues of Eye of Photography, they feature a guy named Mark Gonzalez, who's a skater.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you read that or not, but
I haven't seen it. I'll look it up now.
yeah. And the thing that he's supposed to be a legend, but the thing that I found interesting, he's like 52 years old and he's still doing this, you know. So, and it is, like you said, hard on your body.
It is truly incredible. I mean, I'm 51, and there are OG legend skaters who, you know, pretty much have retired. They still skate, and they are like in their mid 40s. You know, and the 90s was a really big, well, I mean, skateboarding really became popular like in the 50s and the 60s, and it was kind of advertised and directed towards kids like a frisbee, like it was a fun thing to do. And you know, it was all across the board, guys and girls. I mean, I can't believe I'm spacing on her name. But there's a famous Life cover of, I think her name is Peggy. Oh my God, I'm spacing on her name. And she's on a skateboard. So women had a lot of exposure on, you know, with skateboarding in the earlier days. But then once the kind of 70s, 80s, 90s came along, it really became like a more male centric thing. And they kind of dominated the voice of skateboarding. So even though there were all sorts of folks, I mean,
in the 60s, when we were making skateboards, they were basically 2x4s with roller skates, you know.
Yeah, right.
With the wheels. So
yeah, and sometimes metal, and those weren't the polyurethane wheels that
no, they
came
were
later. Yeah,
they were roller skate wheels. So
yeah, those were tough. Clay wheels, right?
yeah.
Jenny,
Yes.
are you familiar with the film Skate Kitchen? About
Yeah, I watched all those.
I just wondered if you'd had any contact with the filmmaker Crystal Moselle, since it's such a common subject matter.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I think I have started several emails and have never finished them and sent them to her. Unexcusable on my part. No, I'm a huge fan, and actually it's funny, at the there's the movie, and then there was also the series. In the final episode of the series, there are a bunch of girl skaters skating around New York, and I recognized so many of them and had photographed some of them. It was kind of cool.
You had photographed them out west, and then you saw them out east.
Yeah, so a lot of these events that take place, skaters will travel all over. I mean, I have photographed people from Japan, Australia, England, and Sweden on the West Coast because they have flown in for these events. It is a very, very tight community. It's relatively small, and it is, I'm getting goosebumps right now just thinking about all of them like congregating in one place to spend a weekend skating and hanging out and just having so much fun. And, you know, to have that kind of a support system doing something that can be very intimidating and scary. It's a beautiful thing. And there's some incredibly strong young women out there. Oh my God, they're amazing. Like, they are so proactive. And I mean, I'm talking about a lot of the women who are involved in making these organizations run. They're truly inspiring. Pat McGee. That's right. Pat McGee. Thank you.
Jenny,
Charles.
Jenny, what was your spiel? How did you get these people off the rink and in front of your camera?
So if I am at a skate park, I set up and I have a big camera. You can see my camera back there. And I have a giant dark room. And so sometimes people will look at me. I can tell that they're curious. Some people will actually come up to me and ask what I'm doing, or I will just beeline towards someone and say, hi. And I'll show them my skater book and I'll tell them what I'm doing and I'll ask. And generally people will say yes. Although I have to kind of pick and choose when I do that, because I don't like to interrupt people when they're skating. So I am hanging out and I'm watching what they're doing, and I'm kind of picking a moment when they're taking a break, or if they're sometimes if you're at a skate park for a while, you'll notice this. If there's a fence around there will be skaters who are just kind of hanging out, watching for a while. And so I can walk up to them and just say, hey, I'm doing this thing. At the events, I am, it's a lot easier for me to walk up to people. And also the events it's kind of like a whole festival of things. There are booths everywhere. People walk by, but they'll notice me. Nowadays, people have seen me or my work and they'll be like, oh, is that, are you the person who did this? So the events make it a lot easier.
Did anybody ask you for payment, and also did you get permits to take and use their pictures?
So I have everyone sign a model release. That allows me, it gives me permission to do anything I want. And sometimes I'll just joke about them and joke about it and say, I'm going to sell your image. I joke around a lot with them and make tons of money. But, I'm like, look, I'm just an artist. This is not for commercial use, and stuff like that. And also it is, I provide each person who I photograph a JPEG of their tintype. So I ask them, they have to sign the model release. And if they're underage, I ask them for a parent or guardian. And there are a lot of underage skaters at these events, and their parents are always there. And their parents are super psyched on it too. They love it. So I get their Instagram handle, I get their email, I get their cell phone, all these different ways to contact them, because over time, sometimes you can't read somebody's writing, or sometimes it's just wrong or out of date or something like that. And also if I tag someone, or if I post something on Instagram, I always want to tag them. So, and I've actually learned about all the social media ins and outs from skaters. They often will say, you should ask people to tag you when they post a picture. Oh, okay, I didn't know that. So now I ask people to do that too. And they are super savvy on the social media end, way more than I am.
I wanted.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm just curious if you ever photograph racers. I live close to where the Broadway starts, so I'm quite familiar with that.
Oh yeah.
I believe that's longboarding, and I don't know if you make a distinction between that or anything like that.
I don't make a distinction at all. Some people say like I'm not very good, or I just started, and it doesn't matter. A skater is a skater is a skater.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't show this one, but I have a photograph of, and actually I think it might have been in the, it's up on my wall, it's hard to see, a mother and a daughter, and the daughter's 3 years old. and she's just learning how to skate. And actually that one, it was at an event, a 2-day event, and the mother contacted me the night of the first day. And she asked if she and her daughter could have their tintype made. And she explained the age of her daughter. And I basically was like, I mean, I don't really like to photograph kids that young because my experience tells me they just can't sit still. It's really tough. And it is very expensive. I need to make sure, I just need to make sure that I can make successful tintypes. And it gets really busy at these events. But I told her, I said, okay, well, if she's 3 years old and she's learning to skateboard, she clearly has balance down, and she, you know, she's a step ahead. And so I said, you know, she needs to be able to be still for 30 seconds. So the next day she comes up to me and she says, we practiced 3 times. I set a stopwatch for 30 seconds every time. So they had practiced, and man, that is a killer tintype. I should find it and put it up, or I'll look for it in the book. You know, so anyway, yeah, any level. Oh, here it is.
Oh,
that's one, yeah.
And I set it up so that they were sitting down. And then I suggested to my, that Vada, who's the daughter, lean against her mom a little to help stabilize her. And then, you know, whenever I photograph a parent with children, I just say, look, if they start moving, ignore it. If one of you is in focus, that's fine. And if the kid is a little blurry, don't worry about it. Like, focus on you. Yeah, like, you just pay attention to me. You be as still as you can and forget about your kid. I'll worry about your kid. And actually, it's funny because when I photograph kids who have parents nearby, sometimes the mother will crimp their hair or tell them to do this or tell them to do that. And I'll walk up to the kid and I'll just say, don't listen to your mom. Only listen to me. It's just you and me. And they always giggle. They think it's funny because, I mean, when do you get to tell a kid not to listen to their parents, right? It's like, you have to pay attention to me. It's you and me. And it's this interesting little bond that I get with my subjects.
So you take some of your subjects, you take them off site, basically. I mean, you don't.
No, I am right in the middle of everything.
So you get them right at the skate park.
It's right there.
Okay.
I'm in the middle of so much. I actually have some behind the scenes pictures. Do you want to see them, or am I running out of time here?
If you can do it pretty quickly.
I'll do it super quick. Okay. Let's get rid of this. That's a funny story I won't tell you now. That's me right by a skate park. That's my darkroom, my camera, all my chemistry, and the trays of water wash and all that stuff. As you can see, I'm right there by the skate park. And I use that fence in order to anchor people so that they can be still. There's me right in the middle of everything at an exposure in Southern California. You can see the half pipe there on the right. Right there in the middle of everything. This is just at a skate park, so it's not so crowded. Me with a couple of my subjects. Me set up hidden behind a fence because sometimes I'm asked to leave, so I like to make myself not too visible. And where are the other ones? Ah, hold on. They're not showing up. Here we go. These are the ones where you can really see I'm in the middle of everything. So this is in Seattle. I'm explaining to my subjects about the process and what I need from them. You can see there's a skate park right there. Somebody behind us is filming with that mic. There's just hundreds of people everywhere. Finishing up and showing the tintype to the subjects. That's fixing it when they get to watch their faces appear. And that's that. All right. I think I've taken up enough time.
I wanted to ask one question.
Sure.
At the very beginning, you mentioned, you know, going by a skate park in Seattle and then sort of doing the same thing in Berkeley. And the first thing that hit you was sort of almost like a facility to be able to go to a place like that and make photographs. But besides that, what was the thing that sort of piqued your interest in skaters specifically at that point at the very beginning? Because to me, it sounds like almost like, you know, going to a foreign country where you maybe don't speak the language and trying to get in and do something, you know, very worthwhile, which I think the book is incredibly worthwhile and unique. But I was curious about that, if there was something that really said to you, skaters, there's something personal there that I really want to look at.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. That's a great question. And honestly, I kind of skipped over a lot of stuff in my talk, but the main thing was that, you know, I had, there are a lot of stereotypes about skaters. Rebellious, troublemakers, assholes, whatever it is, negative stereotypes. And I did not see any of that. I saw a culture that was so rich and so deep. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I'm giving myself goosebumps again. I'm a bit of a sentimentalist. I just really loved a culture, you know. What I saw was like extreme discipline and creativity and support. And I saw this, I witnessed this with people who I thought were friends and knew each other for a long time, yet they had just met that day. Like it is this thing. And yeah, it's just this beautiful culture and community that, you know, they may look tough or whatever, but man, I mean, a lot of these guys and gals totally shy, you know. I think they're being a jerk. They're just shy, like me. So it's like I had to learn that my shyness might come off as being arrogant or whatever. So I had to learn to like approach. And I learned that from skaters who would approach me. And whenever they approached me, they were super kind and they were super like into it. You know, it was another thing is, you know, they're used to digital photography or whatever, or videos. They're focusing on capturing each other, doing tricks or whatever. And I am, you know, the polar opposite of that. And so, and there's another component too, because skateboarding is a very DIY, do-it-yourself world in all ways. And I made my darkroom. I make every print or tintype by hand. I mean, my thing is totally DIY too. And so there is this connection. But just to answer your question, it was the community and it was the culture that was just a complete, just discovering how beautiful it was. And just, I mean, I love watching them skate. I love watching their interactions with each other. The age ranges, you know, little kids skating, falling, big, you know, like 20, 30-year-olds going to help the little kid who's falling or high-fiving them when they make a trick. I mean, it's really, I mean, it's just a fantastic community.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you very much, Jenny. Where can we
you.
get Skater Girls?
Oh, right. You can get Skater Girls at my website, jennysampson.com. You can also, I actually have a collector's limited edition thing that I should have shown you a picture of. It's on my website. But anyway, you can get them on my website, both books. The collector's thing that I'm describing is a handmade book encasement with a tintype inlaid title plate. And it comes with both books and a pigment print from Skater Girls. And that's on the website. Yeah, so there, Daylight Books also carries my book, of course. And if you want to support your local independent bookstore, please do that too. They should be carrying it. And if they don't, you can ask them to bring it in.
Okay, thank you very much, Jenny.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Robert, we'll pass it to you.
Very good, thank you. Jenny, that was terrifically interesting, and I'm envious of your Zoom skills.
Thank you.
To hold things up and see how that works. But first, I thought I'd talk a little bit about how this book came about, and it all begins with seeing an art exhibition that included some of Bin Don's wonderful chlorophyll prints, these big tropical leaves with the images of the Vietnam War and of the victims of the Khmer Rouge genocide, and just being blown away and going back and back to the museum, pulling up a chair, reading about the images, jotting notes. And since I'm primarily a writer and primarily a poet, I started writing poems in response to these marvelous and moving images, partly because it spoke to my generation's experience. The Vietnam War was my war. Although I was not in the army, I didn't fight, it affected the generation profoundly. But also, as a poet, Walt Whitman is, the father of American poetry, and as Emily Dickinson is the mother of American poetry. And so I'm deeply involved with Whitman. And when I saw Bin's Leaves, I thought of Walt Whitman and Leaves of Grass and his whole central trope that death goes into the ground and life emerges renewed from it. And eventually I got Bin Don's contact information from the museum, and I sent him an email and told him what I was doing, asked him some questions, and he responded with real generosity and warmth. And we struck up a correspondence. And the first outcome of this exchange was a book that we did together of his images and my responding poems. And that book is called Ancestral Altars. And it was produced by the wonderful Catherine McNamara of Artists Proof Editions as an iBook, an interactive iBook, so that the art is there, you can expand it, you can look at details. The audio of me reading the poems is in there, and it's only an iBook, electronic book at this point, although there's talk of doing a trade edition. The next thing that happened is that Hollins University brought Bin Don to Roanoke for a semester-long residency, artist in residencies. And so we got to meet in person for the first time. And I gave him a copy of Walt Whitman's collected poems. I had little check marks next to the poems that he had to read because they were so applicable to his project. And he wanted to read Whitman with me, and he said, I'm also a landscape photographer, and I want to travel and see this new part of the country. Of course, he's from the Bay Area, and he wanted to go to the Civil War battlefields. So we started doing road trips, sometimes taking a long weekend, getting a hotel someplace and going to Gettysburg, or just making a big loop driving and getting over to Appomattox and up to Sharpsburg and so on. He brought his big view camera, and I brought my notebooks and my collected Whitman. And we did a lot of driving together, and this was a chance for us just to talk, and then he would be photographing mainly to make daguerreotypes and cyanotypes at this point. And while he was doing the photography, I would make notes for new poems as things occurred to me. And this is where we began to talk about doing an exhibition together, which eventually happened. It was sponsored and first exhibited by the Taubman Museum of Art here in Roanoke in 2015, which was the big anniversary year for the Civil War. It was a sesquicentennial. And in preparation for this exhibition, which included bin cyanotypes, some daguerreotypes, other wartime images that he had done, a few of his leaf prints of Vietnam War veterans were actually images drawn from 1 Week's Dead in that marvelous, terrible issue of Life magazine that was simply portraits of 1 Week's Dead, these young men that all died that week in Vietnam. So we had all these things, and we made big images of my poems to hang next to some of his art. But he said, we really need some chlorophyll prints of Civil War photographs. We knew about the Lillienquist collection in the Library of Congress that has all these tintypes and ambrotypes, and that have been put up online in these wonderful high resolution TIFFs. And we wanted to have chlorophyll prints, but Ben said, well, I'm not really doing much chlorophyll printing anymore. So he said, why don't you? And he taught me the process, and he's a marvelous teacher. He doesn't teach too much. You try stuff, you fail. He says, well, why don't you try this? And I did this for 2 or 3 years, and eventually we started getting some results that we thought might be exhibition worthy. So he turned me into a photographic artist, although I almost never use a camera. And I have some of these cast and framed leaf prints that were in the exhibition. Try not to get too much reflection. I mean, how's the, can you see it okay? Yeah, all right. So this is what he made me do. And I made a lot of them. So we sort of thought of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial with this wall of names, but one wall was this wall of faces. And we had 2 facing walls in this exhibition, and one was Bin's leaf prints from the Vietnam War, and the facing wall was my Civil War images from the Lillienquist collection. And then I also did some Whitman portraits. This is Walt Whitman in 1887, when he's an old man. And I show you this one because it's one that's quite special to me, because I've made a point of visiting Walt Whitman places, and one of them is in Camden, New Jersey, where he lived the last years of his life. And it's a New Jersey museum now. And so you go through this house, and they've taken it back to the way it was when Whitman lived there. And they've got his boots, they've got his bed, they've got his bathtub, but also out back, there's a little garden. And, you know, at the end of Song of Myself, Whitman says, I effuse myself in eddies and lazy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. So I went out into his garden, and there were some hostas growing there. And I asked to pluck a couple of leaves, and I'm surprised that they allowed me to do this. And so I brought them out to the car, and I had brought my kit for making leaf prints. And I put them together with these hosta leaves from Whitman's garden and put them in the back window of the car as I drove back home to Virginia. And that's how this one was developed, the one that I showed you. And so that's a leaf from Walt Whitman's garden, from the soil that he trod. Basically, when I make leaf prints, I'm just taking Whitman literally. I mean, he said, you know, the leaves of grass are the beautiful uncut hair of graves. And it revivifies all life in its time. And so I'm just enacting his central metaphor. Now, the exhibition had a good run, and it traveled to the Memorial Art Gallery in Rochester, New York, and to the Phillips Museum in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And afterwards, you know, when it was done traveling and this exhibition was going to be no more, and we got all the work back, Ben and I wanted to make a book that would outlast the exhibition. And so that is how War Memoranda came to be. It's a cloth-bound edition. And the story of its making is a bit of an odyssey. Initially, because I worked so heavily with the Lillienquist family collection at the Library of Congress, the Library of Congress Publications Office was going to do the book. And one of their editors and the director were very high on this. So I started making plans for this book, and then both of them, one of them retired and the other one got a new job, and suddenly no one at the Library of Congress wanted to take somebody else's project. And so the Taubman Museum stepped into the breach and said, well, we will be your publisher, but we don't really have a budget for making books. And we don't have a publications department per se. So Ben and I decided to do this with some support from the Taubman Museum, but we thought, well, we're going to have to make the money first. How do we do that? And back in the old days, of course, especially in 19th century London, they used to publish books by subscription. That is, they'd advertise the book and people would pay the subscription, so they were going to get the book when it was done. And when you sold enough subscriptions, you made the book. That's what we did, but we used Kickstarter. And so we promised the book as premium, and then at higher levels, there were artworks and so forth. But let me show you some of the book now. Now that I've told you all of our sad stories about the difficulties of making it, we're really quite delighted. There is a lot of art in it, but it also has a lot of content. It's a book that we hope people will actually read, and it's put together with a kind of collage effect that we hope accretes into a meaning, especially in this moment where we have such a fight, especially in my part of the country, in the Southeast United States, about war memorials and remembering the Civil War and all these Confederate memorials that are getting torn down and so forth. And so the book has a kind of thesis about war memorials, but it has a lot of pages, just facing pages of leaf prints. And I must tell you, preparing the transparencies with these images for the leaf print process and staring into these faces while I was doing that work, often with their faces blown up very big on my screen so that I could make adjustments, and looking across the 2 centuries back into these eyes, I felt interrogated. I felt like I was being questioned about the issue of war, its costs, and the way we should remember it. And one of the theses of the book is that we should remember war by looking at the faces of those who have suffered it, and know that it happens to individuals, one person at a time, each with their own life and family. And so this is our wall, this section of faces with, in the chlorophyll prints, northern and southern, black and white. And then the other sort of gallery in the book is of the cyanotypes of the battlefields and cemetery sites. This is a cyanotype of the Stonewall Jackson Cemetery in Lexington, Virginia, just up the road from us here in Roanoke. And, you know, these are obviously, this one's Antietam in Sharpsburg. Obviously, these are contemporary landscapes, contemporary captures, but because Bin is using a 19th century technology, it overlaps our moment and the moments that are being memorialized. But the genius of Bin, to me, that struck me right away was every medium that he decides to use carries its own freight of meaning that's appropriate to his subject matter. He had me sit down on one of the monuments in Gettysburg. And I was reading there Molly Rogers' wonderful book called Delia's Tears, which is Molly Rogers writes beautifully about photography and reading photographs. And her first book was called Delia's Tears, and it's about these daguerreotype photographs made of slaves during slavery as a kind of anatomical racial study. And it's kind of a horrifying story. And yet these portraits have tremendous power, probably in a different way for us now than then. So some of the content, we got wonderful writers to contribute. I mean, I wrote an essay on memorials. I wrote about the Lillienquist family collection. There's a generous selection from Whitman's war poetry in it. Also his prose writings from memoranda during the war. But we also had 4 very distinguished contributors who wrote essays. Molly Rogers herself wrote an essay in response to the exhibition. David Lehman, the poet and Whitman scholar, wrote about the visionary Whitman. Poet Stanley Plumley wrote about Whitman's organicism, his whole idea about nature and the cycles of life and theories of the soul. And Barbara Baer, senior historian at the Library of Congress, wrote a fantastic essay about Walt Whitman and the Civil War. So there are many parts to the book. I wrote some poems in the voices of a couple of Civil War soldiers. I was moved by some of these images that I was seeing and felt like I wanted to imagine their voices. So there are a lot of pieces here, a lot of content. But I wanted to talk a little bit about process and especially the chlorophyll print process, because I don't know how many of you know about the chlorophyll print process. I mean, I urge you to try it. It's very simple to do. It takes a while and some experience to maybe get the results you want. But again, you know, this is the actual leaf. Every leaf print, every chlorophyll print is unique. Even if you do the same image in another leaf, it's another leaf. And I start with the appropriated image from the Library of Congress, and they make it available in these large high resolution. And there's, fortunately, I don't have to get any releases from these guys. It's all in the public domain. So I can download these big files, and I need to simplify them for the leaf print process. So I usually remove backgrounds. I boost contrast. I adjust the contrast so it'll work properly with the chlorophyll print process. It means they need to be a little darker than usual, a little less contrast. Sometimes these wonderful little ambrotypes and tintypes have scratches and mars in them, and I leave some of those, but some I want to clean up a little bit. I do use Photoshop for this photo work. And then you simply print out a positive on an overhead transparency, just a vinyl transparency. And I usually just use 8.5 by 11s because a lot of leaves are small enough. When I wanted to work with some big elephant ears, I went to a service and got some big transparencies printed. But you basically place the transparency on top of the leaf that you're going to use. Underneath the leaf is a board or a piece of glass with some absorbent material on it, because the leaf will sweat a little. And you put the transparency on, ink side up, and then another sheet of glass. So it's a sandwich that you clip together and then expose in the sun. And you know, you need to experiment with this, because the big decision is, when is it done? When do I take it out? If you try and take off the transparency and put it back just right, you can't do it. It won't happen. And you can't really see under the dark part of the transparency to see how it's doing there. You have to judge in the halftone areas. So, you know, and to boot, the weather affects the time and the kind of leaf. Some leaves just absolutely don't work at all. They just turn brown. And I was very disappointed when I found out that lilac leaves just turn brown, because I wanted to work with, you know, lilac leaves because of when lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed, but they just don't work. Hostas, on the other hand, are like photo paper. You wouldn't believe the detail you get from a hosta. Also, wild violets, the big elephant ears work well. Hydrangea leaves give you a nice sepia tone. I have plucked grass and matted grass down. I have some Walt Whitmans in leaves of grass that I'm getting ready to cast. So a lot of it is just serendipity, and there's, you know, 9 out of 10 you don't keep, and you do a lot of trial and error, and then you keep your leaves. When you bring them in, they do need to be dried flat. So put them in newsprint and a lot of newspaper above and below, in a press or under a pile of books, so that they can dry completely flat. And this takes several weeks. They have to be bone dry. Then finally, the way these are treated is that they are cast in resin against a sheet of black plexiglass. Now, sometimes I've just sprayed photo fix to the back, and I've put them on fine art paper with a letterpress text. So you can do that. I do spray them with UV protectant spray before I cast them. And when I first was doing these leaf prints, I mailed them all to Ben to cast because he's really good at casting, and you can, if you're not experienced, you can not get all the bubbles out and wreck your leaf. But I'm getting better at casting. I'm doing my own casting now. So maybe that's enough to get started. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have after my rambling. So please go ahead.
Those are beautiful.
Well, thank you.
They're just gorgeous. Yeah, I can imagine how emotional it would be to have those faces staring right back at you. A technical question, the casting and the spray that will fix the image onto the leaf?
When the leaf is brought out of the sun, it just stops.
It just stops.
Because basically this is a photo print, a sun print, and the part of the leaf that's underneath the clear part of the transparency basically gets bleached. And the part that's under the dark part is protected. And so basically you have the image in the natural pigments of the leaf. I mean, there is a really difficult reverse process where you use a negative, but keep the leaf on its stem alive so that the chloroplasts actually migrate out from under the dark areas to get sun. But this takes weeks and is very difficult. So I don't do that.
Yeah.
So basically it's the bleaching, and then when you bring it in, it's stopped. So the spraying and the casting is basically to protect it from any further bleaching or fading.
Okay.
And if you exhibit it or if you hang it in your home, you don't want it exposed to direct light. You probably want to rest it sometimes in darkness because, Ben is still a young man and we don't know how long these things last.
Yeah.
But the spray and the resin certainly gives them longevity.
Yeah. And I would think too that once the leaf dies and dries, like the chlorophyll isn't in there anymore, right? So theoretically it wouldn't.
Well, the chlorophyll is in there, but it's just dried out. It doesn't continue to change color with age. I mean, it's done somehow, but it's I'm looking again, it's still green. It's the green lasts.
Okay. Yeah. And wow, that story of how you made the Walt Whitman one is just unbelievable.
Well,
that's just
another parallel example is using so-called witness leaves. And as I've traveled around to the various battlefield parks, I've gained permission to pluck leaves from witness trees, that is, trees that were growing there and alive during the battle and are still alive. And the ones that I've gone back to again and again are the catalpa trees in front of Chatham Manor in Falmouth, Virginia, which is the place that Whitman visited when he traveled from Brooklyn down to the Battle of Fredericksburg, when he heard that his brother was wounded. And he found his brother, who had a very slight wound. His brother stayed in the army, survived the war. But while Whitman was there, he visited this Union hospital, which had been made in this manor house that the owners had fled from. And he wrote in his memoranda during the war, in his war journals, that he stood in the front yard and looked at the pile of amputated limbs at the foot of a tree that had been thrown out the window by surgeons in their hate during the battle. And those two catalpa trees are still there and blossoming and leafing year after year. Their bark is so gnarled, you can see contorted faces in it. And they drank at some point, 150, 200 years ago, the blood of these amputations.
Yeah.
And so I have made images of Union soldiers in leaves from those catalpa trees. And I should find you that particular image in the book.
That's so powerful.
This is a Union amputee in a catalpa leaf from one of the Falmouth catalpas.
Wow.
So in some ways, I don't know, it gets a little eerie.
More goosebumps.
What else?
I guess I think I have more of a comment, or just, I don't know if it's so much of a question.
Mhm.
But what I find really remarkable about your work is it really reminded me how that idea of being under your bootstraps from Whitman's earlier work, which for me just felt like such almost a religious statement, like just saying that treating death with so much hope, like it's such a wonderful, glorious thing. And yet it does continue on, and especially your work really shows me that to the darker Civil War poems, that death through pain leaves that scar on the land. And I don't know if you experienced this or thought about that transition, the change from the earlier work and almost the joy of death to the darkness of death. I mean, at least to me, certainly at Whitman's age, but also watching so many young people die must have been just changed his views on death.
Well, actually, I have thought about that, and there's some reflection of that in the book here. You know, I mean, I think you've read Whitman very well. That early period of Song of Myself, it's ecstatic and visionary, and death is almost romantic. You know, he talks about the revivification of life out of the ground, and says the smallest sprout shows there's really no death, or if there was, it did not stand at the end of life to arrest it. And death is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier.
Yes.
And then, of course, it's remarkable that after he visited his brother down in Fredericksburg, he took a train back up to DC and visited the hospitals there, and then stayed for the duration of the war and visited the young men in the hospitals in DC. And during those years, it ruined his health, ministering to them, becoming exhausted. He actually had a series of strokes that he never fully recovered from. But sitting with his great biographer and contemporary Horace Traubel, he talked about this and we quote it here in the book. He said, "I had to pay much for what I got, but what I got made what I paid for it, much as it was, seem cheap. I had to give up health for it, my body, the vitality of my physical self. Oh, so much had to go. What did I get? Well, I got the boys. For one thing, the boys, thousands of them, they were, they are, they will be mine. I gave myself for them. I got the boys, then I got Leaves of Grass, the consummated book, the last confirming word. I got that. the boys, the leaves, I got them. So I think, writing his war poetry and finding the way that his central trope could persist in darkened tones, he understood how it rounded out his life and his career. And I think the two biographies that are just central to American history are Walt Whitman's and Abraham Lincoln's.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Robert, do you have your chat open?
I don't have it open, but I see things when they pop up.
Okay, go down to the bottom and you've got a couple questions.
Okay.
One from Susan, who's a fan of yours and one of your supporters for the Kickstarter campaign.
Oh, yes, I see.
At the end of that, she has a question for you.
Can you say anything about the considerations and decisions that were made to retain the integrity of the prints in book form? Well, that's a tough one, because if you're holding the leaf print in your hands, it's different from seeing it on a video screen. It's different from seeing the print of the leaf in a book. They're not reproducible the same as things that are made to be prints. And that's true to some extent with Bin's Cyanotypes, to a great extent with the one daguerreotype image of his that we included in the book.
And with tintypes.
Yeah, maybe you know his series of the Lafayette Hillside Memorial to our contemporary wars in the Middle East. And again, we put it in the book because it's another example of Bin using a technology to make a meaningful connection between the Civil War and our contemporary wars. This looks like it could be a field cemetery in the 1870s or something. But in fact, we did photograph the leaves before they were cast. It wouldn't make a good image if you tried to photograph them when they're in the resin. And did make high resolution scans so that we could at least print faithful images that nevertheless are not the leaves. So there is distance, yes.
I mean, just to kind of mirror that, I had the same experience with my tintypes because, as you're well aware, like they just, they are objects. What you and Bin made and make are objects, and what I make are objects. And so I too, like what you were describing, like you have to just decide on how you want it to look in a book, because it's never going to look like it looks. And you're never going to have that same experience with it, because they are very, they are physical objects, and they have a life unto themselves.
Exactly. Well, and in some ways the books, it's like you leave a breadcrumb that might lead back to the individual artwork itself. If it arouses, I mean, if it's a way of sharing, fine. But it would be wonderful if people could see an exhibition of your work, of my work, of work that's like this. And I'm intrigued by your artist's book, which your construction, one of a kind piece that includes your tintypes and so forth, because I make artist books too, and apply leaves into it, and leaves on leaves. So I'd love to do another exhibition with Bin, but this one had a good run. It traveled to 3 places, so we got that.
I want to see it.
Well, maybe we'd have to meet in Iowa or something.
Sounds good.
Not at the moment.
No, not at the moment.
Robert?
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
Robert, I'm just haven't really thought through this. You've given me lots of food for thought here, but so I'll ramble through this probably. But first, I wanted to say that my father, my name's Pat Rose. My father, John William Rose, fought in 3 wars: World War II, Korea, and Vietnam.
Right.
He died 2 years ago, and we buried him at Arlington National Cemetery. If anyone deserved that honor, he did. My mother experienced war as well. She was born and raised in Austria. She was 8 years old when Hitler moved in during the Anschluss of Austria. So she has experienced war. I, of course, have never experienced war on, my soil. Of course, I've lived through the Vietnam era and understood from afar what was happening. But I was interested in the story you told about Walt Whitman and his devotion to the wounded soldiers from the battlefields. And I don't know, I'm not a poet. I don't know, I haven't really read much of or any of Walt Whitman, frankly. But I wondered if he experienced war himself in the battlefield. But if he didn't, then his connection to war was post-war, ministering to those brave soldiers who died. And I don't know if you've personally experienced war, Vietnam or Afghanistan or whatever, but your connection now to war is producing this beautiful book. I wonder if you see it the same way as Walt Whitman might have experienced this, dedication to the fallen soldiers of the battlefield.
That's an interesting question, Pat. Whitman had a much more vivid experience of war than I ever have. He was never a combatant. He was in early middle age at the time of the war, although his visit to the front at Fredericksburg was in 1862, in the first year of the war, and he stayed and ministered to wounded soldiers in the hospitals throughout the duration of the war. So he certainly experienced the war in assisting in the hospitals. He held young men as they died. He brought them things, he read to them, he helped them write letters home. I'm not sure he was ever at the front when there was actually combat going on, but he was there soon enough to see a pile of amputated limbs outside a field hospital. For myself, I drew a high lottery number and was not drafted to the Vietnam War. I knew people who had gone. When I write about war, it's mainly about memorial through the access that I'm gained by reading and especially by visiting memorials. I've just published a new collection of poetry called Into the New World that has a whole section of war poems because my generation was so marked by the Vietnam War. And though I didn't have to go, I have been impressed by the need to witness to the reality of war so that if we are called upon to fight, we know exactly what we're getting into and the cost that will be required of the combatants and their families. So I think very much of some of my work as a work of witness, although I can only witness from a member of the culture. About memorials, I wanted to read this marvelous passage from Whitman's prose work, Memoranda During the War. And this is what I would offer to those who are part of the controversy over the fate of our Civil War memorials in the South. For Whitman, the fittest memorial was American ground itself. And he wrote about all of the dead and lost in the war, the bodies unrecovered that simply moldered into the ground, were washed away in rivers and creeks. And he said about the infinite dead that they are in nature's chemistry distilled, and will be in every future grain of wheat and ear of corn, and every flower that grows and every breath we draw.
Mhm.
So when I make a leaf print, especially from a witness tree or from a battlefield leaf, I feel that I'm enacting a little piece of this memorial thought. And so I think we should only put war memorials on battlefields, and especially Confederate memorials that have gone up in city squares to confront all who pass, that were put up during massive resistance to the civil rights integration, and even before that to the old lost cause period during in the South. Those were intimidating statements in the Jim Crow era and in the civil rights era. I don't think they belong there. I feel quite differently about the memorials and the statuary that I see on the battlefields. That we go to battlefields and we go to cemeteries to contemplate the dead and to remember. And memorials can do their work there. For Whitman, it was the land and what came out of it.
I want to say one quick thing. That's very interesting. This is Pat again. My father was a student of the Civil War and a great reader. He read books about all of history, really, but he was particularly interested in the Civil War. But my parents were great world travelers. And my mother was dragged to every country they went to. He found an important battlefield or a cemetery or a museum. So she, dutifully went along to these locations with him where he could pay homage to the fallen and relive, I think, his feelings of experiencing war himself and honoring that. So it's interesting. Now I have to purchase your book. Even though he's no longer with us, it'll be forever now a tribute to his sacrifices in his life. So thank you very much.
Thank you. My book is only available on my website these days, robertschultz.com. So if you indeed want to get the one, just look there.
Okay. Robert, we have another one in the chat. DuPont Circle.
Yes.
If you could read the entire paragraph for everyone, I think it'd be a good way to wrap up the day.
All right. I'm not seeing the name of who.
Well, it says from DuPont Circle to everyone.
A powerful exhibit at the Mutter Museum at the College of Physicians about the horrific wounds inflicted upon the Civil War soldiers. Whitman is referenced. I then went to DC, and upon ascending from the escalator at DuPont Circle, a long ascent, I was surprised and pleased to see a Whitman poem encircled at the top. Do you know anything about this? And could you comment on Whitman's current standing? Can one of you read my comment, please, since I am not on mic? Yes, I know about that poem at DuPont Circle. And as a matter of fact, one of our contributors to War Memoranda, Barbara Baer, comments on it and reads it in the context of our work in War Memoranda. There's also a plaque in the National Archives that marks the place where Whitman visited Civil War soldiers during the war. The archives building was brand new then, and they didn't hadn't built enough temporary hospitals, and so they put the wounded into the archives. And so he's quite a presence in Washington, D.C. And thank you, all of you, for your questions.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I will link on our website both to Robert and to Jenny, so that if you would like to make a purchase, you can. Invite you to come back next month, which will be on the 19th of December. Can't believe it's December already. And we'll be back at 2 o'clock, the usual time. We'll have Susan Berger talking about life and soul, and Sandy Carson's introducing his new book, Passing Place. So thank you again, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.